An orphaned black man was carefully stacking sacks of corn on the shelf when he suddenly saw a homeless old woman being mocked by two young men. He walked over, spoke to her with kindness and invited her to share a warm. Touched by her situation, he took her in as his mother. But he had no idea that she was actually the mother of a wealthy CEO, and when her son appeared, his life would change forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. The Maplewood market was always loud in the afternoon. Vendors shouted prices over the rumble of delivery trucks, kids ran between the stalls waving crumpled dollar bills, and the air was thick with the smell of fried food mixed with exhaust fumes. But on the far side of the market, sitting on the cracked steps beside an overflowing dumpster, there was a woman who didn't belong to any of it. Evelyn Brown sat hunched forward, her shoulders tight as if she wanted to disappear into the concrete. Her gray hair clung to her forehead, dirty from days without washing, and her coat was stained and ripped at the sleeves. She looked older than her 55 years. Her hands shook while she picked through a paper bag filled with scraps, half an apple, crusts of bread, a piece of cheese turning green at the edges. People passed by without stopping. Some looked away quickly, others slowed down just long enough to let disgust show on their faces. A group of teenagers stood a few feet away laughing, their phones out whispering things she could clearly hear. "Take a picture, man. Look at her like a zombie." Evelyn's jaw clenched, but she didn't lift her head. She focused on the food in her hand because if she looked at them, if she let the anger rise, she might cry. And crying in front of strangers only made them laugh harder. She whispered under her breath, words broken and hoarse. I just need something to eat." Across the street, Darius Miller was carrying two 50-pound sacks of feed on his shoulders. His work shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and his arms ached from the morning shift. He was used to the grind. At 21, he had been working at Henderson's Grain since he was 16. Work, pay rent, keep quiet, that was his life. But when he noticed the teenagers pointing their phones at Evelyn, something in him stopped cold. He set the bags down by the shop door and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. He could ignore it, just like everybody else. He could tell himself it wasn't his business. But the way she sat there, holding a piece of trash like it was worth something, cut into him. He took a slow breath and walked toward her. "Ma'am," his voice was cautious, steady, the way you'd talk to someone who might scare easily. Evelyn looked up, her eyes cloudy but still sharp enough to show there was a person in there. For a moment, she didn't speak. She only stared, trying to understand if he was mocking her like the others. Her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I don't know where I am." Darius glanced at the crowd. The teenagers were still laughing. A woman at the flower stand crossed her arms and shook her head as if disgusted that he was even speaking to Evelyn. "When's the last time you ate something real?" he asked quietly. Evelyn pressed her lips together. She didn't remember. Darius let out a breath through his nose, annoyed at himself because he knew what this meant. He was about to spend money he barely had, but he couldn't walk away. He pushed through the market crowd, bought a turkey sandwich, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water from Tony's Deli, then came back and sat on the step next to her. "Here," he said simply, placing the food in her hands. Evelyn blinked at the sandwich like it was unreal. She peeled the paper slowly, then took a small bite. After a pause, she ate faster, tears sliding down her face as she chewed. Darius sat quietly beside her, not looking at the teens anymore, not caring if they were still laughing. She stopped after half the sandwich and whispered, "Why?" Darius rubbed the back of his neck. He could have said it was nothing, or that anybody would have done the same. But he knew better. Most people had walked right by her, because everybody deserves a chance, he said. Evelyn's hand trembled as she held the sandwich. She wanted to believe him, but the years on the street had taught her that kindness usually came with a price. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" Darius asked. She shook her head. "Well, I got a couch," he said after a pause, surprising himself. "It's not much, but it's warm. And safe." Evelyn stared at him, trying to read his face. His eyes were steady, tired but honest. She wanted to ask what he wanted from her in return, but something in his voice told her the answer, nothing. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. Darius thought of the nights he spent alone after his parents' accident, the silence in the small apartment, the way nobody cared if he came home or not. He thought of how easily she could be him if life had tilted a little differently. He looked down at the ground and said, "Because I know what it feels like to have nobody." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting the pull between fear and hope. A stranger had just offered her more than food. He had offered her a place in the world, even if only for one night. She nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. Okay. The sound of her acceptance was almost a relief for Darius. He stood, picked up the small bag she had beside her, torn fabric with almost nothing inside, and said, "Come on, let's get you out of here." As they walked away, the teenagers muttered, "Crazy guy taking her home." But Darius didn't turn around. He kept moving, his steps heavy but certain, while Evelyn followed close, her hands gripping the sandwich like it was a lifeline. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in months, Darius felt like he wasn't completely alone. The walk from the market to Darius's apartment was only 10 minutes, but for Evelyn it felt like miles. Every step, she expected him to change his mind, to tell her he was joking, to shove her away like others had. But he didn't. He walked steady, not too fast, carrying her small torn bag in one hand and opening the building's front door with the other. They climbed a narrow set of stairs that smelled like detergent and fried chicken drifting up from the Chinese restaurant below. Darius's apartment was on the second floor. He unlocked the door and held it open for her. "It's not much," he said, "but it's better than outside." Evelyn stepped inside. The room was small, one old couch, a battered coffee table, a second-hand TV, and a kitchen no bigger than a closet. But to her, it looked like a palace. She hovered near the door, unsure if she belonged. "You can sit down," Darius said, setting her bag on the floor. "You don't have to ask." She lowered herself onto the couch slowly, her hands folded in her lap. She could still taste the sandwich, and the warmth in her chest was almost as strange as the food in her stomach. Darius pulled a chair from the kitchen and sat across from her. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, her forehead wrinkling as she tried to pull the answer from the fog. Finally, she said, "Evelyn. At least I think it's Evelyn." Darius nodded. "I'm Darius." Her eyes moved around the room, taking in the plain walls, the stack of books by the TV, the work boots by the door. "You live here alone?" "Yeah." He rubbed his palms against his jeans. "Been that way since I was 12. Evelyn looked at him, confused. 12. "My parents died in a car crash. I went through the system, foster homes, shelters. When I turned 16, I started working. Got this place when I was 18. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words felt small compared to the weight he carried. For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then Evelyn whispered, "You didn't have to help me today." "I know," Darius said, "but I couldn't just stand there." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. That night, Darius gave her a blanket and a pillow. "The couch is yours," he said. "I'll be fine on the bed." Evelyn tried to protest, but he shook his head firmly. "Don't worry about me, just get some sleep." She lay down, pulling the blanket to her chin. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Why would a stranger do this for me? She wanted to trust it, but trust had been dangerous before. The days that followed were not easy. In the morning, Darius would leave at 6 to haul grain bags and stack feed. Evelyn would wake to the sound of his boots on the floor and the door closing. She often sat staring at the coffee table, trying to remember where she was, who she was, how she got here. Sometimes she wandered into the kitchen and froze in front of the fridge, forgetting what she had opened it for. When Darius came home, sweat still on his back, he found her sitting on the couch, her hands folded, as if waiting for instructions. "You hungry?" he asked one night. She nodded. He heated up canned soup on the stove and handed her a bowl. She ate slowly, careful not to spill, while he sat across from her. After a while, she said softly, "I'm not used to eating like this, sitting down, with someone." Darius gave her a small smile. "You better get used to it, because I'm not letting you starve." Her lips trembled, and she looked down at her bowl. One evening, after a week in the apartment, Evelyn woke from a nap screaming. Darius rushed from the kitchen, his heart pounding. She was sitting upright on the couch, clutching the blanket, her eyes wide and terrified. "Hey," he said quickly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe, you're here with me." Nothing's gonna hurt you. Her breathing was fast, shallow. She shook her head. I saw him. I saw someone. I don't know who, but she couldn't finish. Darius stayed beside her, not touching her but close enough to show he wasn't leaving. It was just a dream. You're okay. You're safe. It took 10 minutes before her breathing slowed. She looked at him, her eyes wet. Why are you doing this for me? Because you remind me of me, Darius said simply. She stared at him, trying to understand. When I was 12, he continued, nobody cared. I remember standing in line at a shelter with nothing but a backpack, and people looked right through me like I wasn't even there. That's what I saw in you that day at the market. I couldn't ignore it. Evelyn wiped her face with the blanket. You shouldn't have to carry me like this. I'm not carrying you, he said. We're carrying each other. You just don't see it yet. Her throat tightened again, and she whispered, son. The words slipped out without warning, soft and shaky, but heavy with meaning. Darius blinked, his chest tightening. It had been years since anyone called him that. He opened his mouth to correct her, but stopped. He looked at her trembling hands, her tired eyes, the fragile hope in her face. He swallowed, and said quietly, yeah, Mom? Evelyn let out a breath. She didn't realize she was holding. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. Over the next few weeks, the word became natural. Son, don't forget your lunch. Mom, I'll pick up your medicine on the way home. Neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Moore from the restaurant downstairs saw Evelyn helping fold napkins and wipe tables, moving carefully but eager to be useful. She good woman, Mrs. Moore told Darius one evening. She just needs someone believe in her. Neighbors began to accept her presence. Mrs. Moore downstairs invited her to fold napkins at the restaurant. Kids in the building waved at her when they passed by. She wasn't just the strange woman from the streets anymore. She was Darius's mother. 10 years passed like that. Ordinary, hard, but filled with something both of them had been missing: family. Darius was 31 now, his shoulders broader, his face older from years of labor. He had finished several community college courses, staying up late to study while Evelyn brewed coffee and asked about what he was learning. Evelyn was 63, her hair had turned fully silver, but her face carried softness instead of despair. She had become part of the neighborhood, known by name, respected as Darius's mom. The apartment above the laundromat was still small, but inside its walls, they had built something rare. They had built a home. The Maplewood hardware store was crowded that Thursday afternoon. Darius stood behind the counter at Henderson's Grain, going over receipts with a farmer when the glass door opened. A tall man in a dark gray suit stepped inside. He didn't look like he belonged in Maplewood. His polished shoes, his watch that probably cost more than most cars in town, and the quiet way he carried himself. His presence turned heads immediately. Darius glanced up and froze. The man looked around the store, distracted, scrolling through his phone as if answering emails. Then his eyes landed on Evelyn. She was at the register helping the farmer calculate how much seed he needed. Her hair was silver now, tied back neatly, and she wore a simple blue dress. She smiled warmly at the old man, tapping the calculator buttons with slow precision. The man's face changed. His eyes widened, his chest lifted like he couldn't breathe. The phone slid from his hand and landed silently on the counter. Mom, he whispered. Evelyn looked up. For a second, her expression was blank. Then her hands began to tremble. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, in a broken voice, she said, Christopher. The farmer stepped aside, confused, as Evelyn staggered around the counter. The man caught her in his arms, and she clung to him with a strength Darius had never seen in her. My boy, she cried. My son, I thought I lost you. Christopher Brown, 38, CEO of Brown Global Developments, held his mother tight. His eyes burned with tears he hadn't let himself shed in years. I looked everywhere, he said. For 8 years I searched. I thought you were dead. Evelyn buried her face in his chest, sobbing like a wound had opened. Darius stood frozen. The farmer gave him a questioning look, but Darius barely noticed. He felt like the floor had cracked open beneath him. They sat in the back office later, the three of them. Christopher kept holding Evelyn's hand, like he was afraid she would vanish if he let go. Where have you been? He asked, his voice breaking. Evelyn wiped her face. I don't know, I don't remember all of it. There was an accident, and then, nothing. Just pieces, and then Darius found me. He saved me. Christopher turned to look at Darius for the first time. His eyes scanned him from head to toe, broad shoulders from years of labor, rough work clothes, skin glistening with sweat from a long day. You took care of her? Christopher asked. Darius shifted in his chair. He wanted to say yes, but the words stuck in his throat. She's family, he said finally. Christopher nodded slowly, though something hard flickered in his eyes. She's my family too. Evelyn looked between them, her face pale with worry. I don't want this to be a fight. You're both my sons, neither man answered. That night, Christopher showed up at their apartment, with a black Tesla parked outside. Evelyn nearly fainted when she saw it. You're coming home with me, he said firmly. I have doctors, I have everything you need. You don't belong in a place like this. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Darius. She's happy here, Darius said, standing in the doorway. Christopher's jaw tightened. She's my mother. I'm not leaving her here to live like this. Evelyn's hands shook. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Darius. Son, she whispered. I think I have to go. He's my blood. The words cut through Darius like glass. He bit the inside of his cheek, fighting the heat in his chest. He wanted to scream that blood didn't matter, that he had been there when nobody else was, that he was the one who sat with her during nightmares, and brought her soup when she was shaking. But he swallowed it. He looked at her trembling face, and saw her own pain. She wasn't choosing against him. She was being pulled back into a life she had lost. I understand, he said, though his voice cracked. Evelyn clutched his arm. Don't hate me. I could never hate you, he whispered. She hugged him tightly, sobbing into his shoulder. Then Christopher guided her out, holding her steady as she climbed into the car. Darius stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights fade. For the second time in his life, he was alone. The apartment felt hollow without her. The next morning, he woke to silence. No coffee smell, no voice telling him he worked too hard, no humming off-key in the kitchen. Just the sound of his own breath in the small room. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, anger clawing at his chest. He had lost his parents at 12. Now, after finally finding a mother again, she was gone. At work he kept his head down, but customers noticed the difference. His co-workers whispered, asking why he looked so empty. He didn't answer. That evening, Mrs. Moore knocked on his door with a container of food. She good woman, she said softly. She love you, maybe she come back. Darius forced a smile and thanked her, but when he shut the door, his eyes burned. 3 days later, while he was closing up the store, the Tesla pulled up outside again. Darius's heart leapt before he could stop it. He stepped outside, expecting to see Evelyn, but it was only Christopher. We need to talk, Christopher said. His polished confidence was cracked, his voice strained. Darius crossed his arms. What do you want? Christopher looked him in the eye, his shoulders heavy. She cries every day. She calls your name in her sleep. Yesterday she tried to walk here, 6 miles before my driver found her. She says this isn't home without you. Darius swallowed hard, fighting the wave rising in his chest. Christopher took a step closer. She needs you. And maybe I do too. The street outside Henderson's Grain was quiet when Christopher finished speaking. Darius stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, his heartbeat pounding against his ribs. He didn't know what angered him more, that Christopher had taken Evelyn away, or that he was now standing here asking for help like nothing had happened. She's your mother, Darius said finally, his voice low but steady. You got the house, the doctors, the money. Why are you coming to me? Christopher took a slow breath, his eyes tired. Because none of that matters to her. She wants you. She asks for you every single day, and I don't know how to give her what she needs. Darius looked away, his throat tight. He wanted to tell Christopher to leave, to go back to his mansion and his perfect world. But the image of Evelyn walking 6 miles down Highway 12 in her house slippers wouldn't leave his mind. She's not strong enough for that, Darius muttered. I know, Christopher said. That's why I'm here. They sat in the break room at the store, the clock ticking on the wall. Christopher leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Move in with us, he said. The house is big enough. You'll have your own space. No one will bother you, but you'll be there for her. Darius laughed bitterly. You think it's that simple? You think I can just walk into your world and fit in? I've been poor my whole life. I worked till my back's sore just to keep the lights on. He stopped himself, his voice sharp. Christopher looked at him calmly. I know we're different. I know you hate me for pulling her away. But I'm telling you the truth, Darius. She's not whole without you. And he paused, searching for words. I don't know how to be the son she deserves. Not by myself. The words hit Darius harder than he expected. He had imagined Christopher as untouchable, arrogant, everything Darius resented about the powerful. But here he was, admitting he wasn't enough. That night, Darius sat in his apartment, staring at the empty couch. He remembered Evelyn's voice, the way she used to say, "Son, you work too hard," and how she hummed when she folded laundry. The silence now was unbearable. He clenched his fists, torn between anger and longing. If he went, he would be stepping into a world that wasn't his, where people like Christopher's family looked down at him before he even spoke. He knew what that felt like. Every sideways glance, every comment about his skin, every reminder that he didn't belong. But if he stayed, Evelyn would suffer, and she had given him 10 years of her life. She had given him something no one else ever had. By midnight, he knew the answer, though it burned in his chest. The next morning, he found Christopher waiting in the black Tesla. All right, Darius said, pulling the strap of his workbag over his shoulder. I'll come, but not for you, for her. Christopher nodded, relief flickering across his face. That's all I wanted. They drove in silence for a while. Darius watched the town disappear behind them, the market, the restaurant, the cracked sidewalks he knew so well. He felt like he was leaving part of himself behind, but he reminded himself of Evelyn's voice calling his name in her sleep. You don't have to trust me yet, Christopher said finally, keeping his eyes on the road. But I hope someday you will. Darius didn't answer. When they pulled up to the Brown estate, Darius felt his stomach tighten. The driveway wound through perfectly manicured lawns that looked nothing like Maplewood. The house itself was massive, stone and glass shining in the sunlight, like something out of a magazine. Evelyn was already waiting at the top of the steps. When she saw him get out of the car, her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in weeks. Son, she called, rushing down, her arms outstretched. Darius caught her, holding her steady. She was crying, but this time it was from joy. I thought you wouldn't come, she said between sobs. He pressed his lips together, trying to keep his own voice steady. I couldn't let you go through this without me. Christopher stood a few steps away, watching them quietly. Evelyn cupped Darius's face in her hands. Now I have both my boys. Darius glanced at Christopher, then back at her. The words stung a little, but he didn't correct her. He knew this was what she needed. Inside, the house felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors, ceilings so high they echoed, paintings that looked too expensive to touch. Darius kept his hands in his pockets, feeling out of place. Evelyn, though, clung to his arm, smiling as if she finally had her family back. Christopher placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. Welcome home. Darius didn't say anything. He wasn't sure it was home, not yet, but he was there, and that was enough, for now. The Brown estate was the kind of place people in Maplewood only saw on TV. The driveway curved for almost half a mile, lined with hedges trimmed so straight they looked like rulers had been pressed against them. The house itself rose up like a fortress, stone walls, glass windows that reflected the sky, a front entrance wide enough to fit a truck. Darius tried not to let it show on his face, but inside he felt small. He had never been this close to wealth before. It was the kind of place that told you, without words, that you didn't belong. Evelyn held his arm tight, as they climbed the front steps. Her smile was wide, proud, like she had finally brought her two sons together, but Darius noticed her hand trembling. Christopher opened the door, and led them in. The marble floor shone like a mirror, and chandeliers hung from ceilings higher than the church in Maplewood. Staff in pressed uniforms moved silently through the halls, carrying trays or polishing furniture that already looked perfect. This is your home now too, Christopher said, glancing at Darius. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But the words sounded fragile even as he spoke them. They didn't wait long before the rest of the family appeared. Richard Brown, Christopher's father, sat in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. His face was sharp, his eyes calculating. Even sitting, he carried authority like a badge. Beside him was Veronica, Richard's second wife. She was in her mid-40s, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her dress sleek and expensive. She smiled when she saw Darius, but it was the kind of smile that cut instead of welcomed. Trailing behind was Adrian, Veronica's son from her first marriage. He was 25, soft around the edges, dressed in designer clothes but moving with the clumsy arrogance of someone who had never worked for anything in his life. "Well," Richard said, his voice dry, "so this is the young man." His eyes swept over Darius like he was inspecting a stranger's shoes. "The one who's been living off my wife." "Dad," Christopher warned. Richard waved him off. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking." Evelyn stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Richard, enough. Darius is family. He gave me a home when I had nothing. You will show him respect." Richard's mouth twitched, but he said nothing more. Veronica moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble. She reached out a hand toward Darius, her smile tight. "So this is Marcus, is it, Darius?" he corrected. "Of course, Darius." She didn't blink. "Welcome, how interesting to have you here." Her tone made it sound like interesting was just another word for unwanted. Adrian snorted, not bothering to hide it. "Mom, are we really doing this? Bringing some random guy into the house? What's next, letting the gardener move in?" Darius's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He knew the look in Adrian's eyes, the look of someone who thought money made him better than everybody else. Evelyn's face hardened. "Adrian, that's enough. Darius is my son. You will treat him as such." Adrian rolled his eyes but backed off, muttering under his breath. Dinner that night was the longest meal Darius had ever sat through. The dining room was bigger than the entire apartment he had lived in with Evelyn. The table stretched almost 20 feet, covered with plates he didn't recognize, and silverware arranged in rows. He sat near Evelyn, who kept smiling at him, trying to make him comfortable. Christopher sat across from them, calm but watchful. Richard ate slowly, watching Darius like a man reading a puzzle. Veronica kept making polite comments that sounded more like digs. Adrian scrolled his phone openly, barely pretending to care. "So Darius," Veronica said, sipping her wine, "what do you do for work?" "I manage at Henderson's Grain," he replied. "Oh," she tilted her head. "Manual labor, that must be exhausting." "It pays the bills," he said, his voice steady. Adrian smirked. "Guess you're not used to food like this, huh?" "Adrian," Christopher snapped. But Darius just looked at him and said evenly, "Food is food. It doesn't matter how fancy it is if you've ever been hungry." The room went silent for a beat. Evelyn reached under the table and squeezed his hand. Later that night, Christopher found Darius out on the terrace. The air was cooler there, and the ground stretched out in silence. "You handled them better than I expected," Christopher said. Darius gave him a sideways glance. "I've been judged before. This ain't new." Christopher leaned on the railing, his expression serious. "You should know, Veronica doesn't like me. She's been trying to push me out of the company for years. If something happens to me, Adrian inherits everything." Darius frowned. "And now that I'm here she'll see me as another threat." Christopher nodded. "Exactly, be careful. She plays dirty." Darius let out a short laugh without humor. "I grew up in foster care. I know what dirty looks like." But inside, he felt the weight of Christopher's warning. He wasn't just stepping into a rich man's house, he was stepping into a battlefield. The next weeks tested his patience. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him, staff whispering, Veronica smiling too sweetly, Adrian making little comments just loud enough to hear. Evelyn tried to shield him, but she was caught between two worlds, the warmth she had built with Darius, and the cold power structure of the Brown family. One afternoon, Darius overheard Veronica in the hallway speaking to a lawyer. "He has no legal claim," she was saying. "He's not blood, he's not even adopted. Once Richard passes, everything goes to Christopher, and then Adrian. This boy has nothing, we can make sure of that." Darius stopped at the corner, his fists tightening. He wanted to walk in, to tell her she was wrong, to demand she respect Evelyn's choice. But he forced himself to breathe, to stay quiet. He knew losing his temper would only prove her point. When he walked away though, his chest burned. He had fought all his life to be seen as worthy, and here he was again, reduced to nothing in the eyes of people who had never known hunger or loneliness. One night, Evelyn found him sitting alone in the guest room. He was staring at the wall, his shoulders heavy. "Son?" she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes tired. "Mom, I don't belong here. They don't want me here, and honestly I don't want to be here either." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "You belong wherever I am, and I want you here. They can't change that." Darius swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "I know," she said. "But simple or not, you are my son, and I won't let anyone take that from you." Her voice was steady, fierce in a way he rarely heard. And for a moment, Darius believed her. It was close to midnight when Darius walked the long marble hallway back to his guest suite. The house was quiet, but the silence was the kind that made his skin prickle. He had learned in the past weeks that Veronica's smiles never meant safety, and Adrian's careless smirks often covered something uglier. He was passing her study when he heard voices. The door was open just an inch, and he froze. Adrian's voice carried through first, low but casual. "It's simple, the brake lines won't hold once he hits the curve. Miller's Point is the perfect spot. Cars go off there all the time." Darius's chest tightened. He pressed his back to the wall, forcing his breath slow. Veronica's voice followed, calm and sharp. "And you're sure he always takes that route?" "Every Tuesday, Mom. He's a creature of habit. Highway 12, same time, same turn. No one will question it." There was a pause. Darius could hear the faint click of her heels against the floor. "And the investigation?" she asked. Adrian chuckled. "Sheriff Morrison still owes us. Dad bailed his son out after that DUI. He'll call it an accident, and close the file." Darius's hands balled into fists. "And the boy?" Veronica asked. Adrian sounded almost bored. "What about him?" "He's not blood, not on any paperwork. Once Edward's gone, we can paint Darius as some opportunist who manipulated Evelyn. Get him out of the house. Maybe even charge him with elder abuse." Veronica's voice dropped lower, but Darius caught the words. "Good, he was never meant to be here." Darius forced himself to step back quietly, his pulse hammering. He didn't breathe until he was down the hall. His mind was racing. He wanted to storm in and confront them, but he knew what would happen. They'd deny it, twist it, and use his anger against him. He needed proof. The next morning, he tried to act normal. Evelyn asked if he wanted more toast, and he managed a small smile. "I'm good, Mom," but inside, he felt sick. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. It would crush her, and if she let anything slip, Veronica would strike sooner. At breakfast, Christopher walked in, already in a suit, glancing at his phone. "Big day?" Evelyn asked. "Important meeting downtown," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "Presentation at 10 sharp." Darius's stomach sank. "Tuesday, Highway 12. Christopher caught his look. "What?" Darius shook his head quickly. "Nothing, just drive safe." Christopher smirked faintly. "Always do," but Darius saw the way he walked fast, energized, almost reckless. He drove fast when he was excited, and today someone had planned for his excitement to kill him. Darius waited until Evelyn was distracted with a phone call, then slipped into his room. He pulled out his phone and hit record. Later that afternoon, when Veronica walked past the garden pavilion, deep in conversation, he was ready. "Yes, Tuesday morning," she was saying. "Highway 12. Miller's Point. It needs to look like brake failure. No witnesses." Darius held the phone tight, his hand sweating. It wasn't much, but it was something. Tuesday came too quickly. Christopher rushed through breakfast, his tie loose, his briefcase in one hand. Evelyn kissed his forehead. "Don't rush, honey. You always drive too fast when you're excited." "I'll be fine, Mom," he said, already heading to the garage. Darius's heart pounded. He wanted to shout the truth, to stop him, but Christopher would never believe it. Not without proof. Veronica couldn't spin. So Darius grabbed the keys to the old pickup truck Christopher had given him and followed. Highway 12 wound through the mountains, beautiful but dangerous. Darius kept his eyes on the sleek Tesla ahead. 10 minutes in, his worst fear came true. The Tesla's brake lights flashed, once, twice, again and again. But the car wasn't slowing. Damn it. Darius muttered, flooring the gas pedal. He could see Christopher gripping the wheel, his shoulders rigid. The Tesla picked up speed on the downhill stretch. Miller's Point was less than a mile ahead. A sharp curve, a flimsy guardrail, and a drop that killed without mercy. Darius's chest burned. He didn't think, he just acted. He pulled alongside the Tesla, his old pickup rattling as it strained to keep up. Christopher turned his head, eyes wide with panic. Darius shouted, though his voice was lost in the roar of engines. He yanked his steering wheel hard, slamming the side of his truck against the Tesla. Metal screamed. The impact pushed both vehicles off the road, through a stand of trees. The pickup rolled, once, twice, before it crashed against a boulder. Darius's head slammed against the window, stars exploding in his vision. The Tesla skidded sideways into a tree, its frame crushed but its cabin intact. For a long moment, the world was silent, except for the hiss of steam. Darius. The voice pulled him back. Pain shot through his ribs as he unbuckled his seatbelt and crawled out of the wreck. His shoulders screamed with every move. Christopher stumbled toward him, blood running down his forehead, but alive. Jesus Christ, Christopher gasped. What the hell were you doing? Darius leaned against the truck, fighting to breathe. Your brakes. Someone cut them. Veronica, I heard her. Christopher froze, his chest rising and falling fast. He turned toward his wrecked Tesla, realization dawning. You saved my life, he said quietly. Yeah, Darius muttered, his vision swimming. That's what brothers do. The sirens came 20 minutes later, an ambulance, police cars, and then Evelyn, pale and frantic, riding in the back of the driver's car. My boys, she cried, clutching both their hands as paramedics loaded them onto stretchers. My brave stupid boys. Darius tried to smile at her, but the pain was too sharp. His last thought before the world went dark was of her face, terrified but full of love. Darius woke in the hospital. 6 hours later, his ribs were broken, his shoulder dislocated, and his head bandaged. The first thing he saw was Evelyn in the chair beside him, her eyes red. You're awake, she whispered, gripping his hand. He swallowed hard. Christopher, her eyes flicked to the bed across the room. Christopher lay still, eyes open but unfocused. The doctors say it's a severe concussion, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. He's breathing on his own, but he won't respond. Darius closed his eyes, guilt crushing his chest. He had saved his brother from the ravine, but maybe not from the consequences. 3 days passed. Evelyn never left Christopher's side. She talked to him constantly, her voice tender, telling him stories, begging him to come back. You work too hard, she whispered one night, stroking his hair. You need to laugh more, like Darius makes you laugh. Darius sat in his wheelchair nearby, silent. His body ached, but the ache inside was worse. He had proof of Veronica's plan, but would it be enough? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look on Adrian's face, smug and careless, talking about brake lines like he was discussing the weather. He saw Veronica's cold smile, and he knew the fight wasn't over. The conference room on the top floor of Brown Global Developments stretched wide, with glass walls looking down on the city below. It was built to impress, but today the air inside was thick with fear and anticipation. Executives shifted in their leather chairs, lawyers whispered into each other's ears, and family members sat stiffly at the far end of the long oak table. At the head stood Veronica Brown, dressed in black like she was already at a funeral, but her tone was sharp, confident, almost smug. Ladies and gentlemen, Veronica began, her voice smooth but firm. We are at a crossroads. Christopher is incapacitated, possibly permanently. Richard is too ill to manage day-to-day operations. For the sake of stability, we cannot wait. I propose my son Adrian be appointed interim CEO with full executive authority. There was a ripple of murmurs, some nodded, some frowned. James Morrison, the oldest board member, raised a hand. With respect, Mrs. Brown, this feels premature. Christopher's doctors, the doctors, Veronica cut in, raising her chin, have made it clear that recovery is uncertain. We cannot gamble with billions of dollars, thousands of employees, and our reputation while we wait for a miracle. Brown Global must move forward. At the far end, Adrian shifted in his seat. He was trying to look serious, but the smirk pulling at his lips betrayed him. He wanted this moment, he had dreamed of it. Darius sat at the back, his ribs sore, his arm strapped in a sling. He wasn't supposed to be here, but Evelyn had insisted. She sat beside him, her hand trembling slightly, her eyes darting between faces. Darius clenched his jaw. He could feel heat rising in his chest with every word Veronica spoke. Finally, Evelyn stood. She looked fragile, her silver hair pulled back, her hands shaking, but her voice carried surprising strength. "I think I need to say something." All heads turned, even Veronica faltered, blinking. "Margaret," Veronica began. "Evelyn," she corrected sharply. "My name is Evelyn Brown, and I will not stay silent anymore." Executives exchanged glances, lawyers whispered. Richard, pale in his wheelchair, narrowed his eyes. "I left this house 8 years ago," Evelyn said, voice breaking slightly, then steadied by anger. "Not only because of Richard's betrayals, I left because I discovered the truth about Veronica." Veronica's smile froze. "I caught her planting drugs in Christopher's room." Evelyn continued. "Cocaine. She planned to call the police and have him arrested, ruin his life, destroy his credibility. And when I confronted her, she looked me in the eye and said, 'I'll destroy him one way or another.' That is the night I ran. And she followed me. She drove me off the road, and left me for dead." Gasps filled the room. Adrian sat bolt upright, his face draining of color. "That's a lie," Veronica snapped. "She's confused, her memory has been damaged for years." Evelyn's voice rose, sharper than anyone had ever heard from her. "I may forget what I had for breakfast, but I will never forget that night. I will never forget the face of the woman who tried to kill me." The room fell into stunned silence. Darius stood slowly, his ribs screamed in pain, but his voice was steady. "She's telling the truth, and I have proof of what Veronica and Adrian planned this week." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen and held it up. Veronica's voice filled the speakers, calm and cold. "Tuesday morning, Highway 12, Miller's Point. Make it look like brake failure." The sound was unmistakable. Gasps again. Faces turned white. That could be anyone's voice. Veronica shot back quickly. Her eyes darted, searching for allies. "Recordings can be faked." "You're right." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Christopher Brown stood there, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was pale, his forehead scarred, but his eyes blazed with fury. The room erupted in whispers. Behind him walked a police officer and Tommy Rodriguez, the family mechanic, clutching his cap nervously in his hands. Christopher's voice cut through the chaos. "Audio can be faked, but it's harder to fake a man willing to testify under oath." He gestured to Tommy. Tommy cleared his throat. "She paid me $5,000 to cut the brake lines, said it was for insurance. But I knew what it really was, and I'm not going to prison to cover for her." The police officer stepped forward. "Veronica Brown, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder and vehicular assault." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the boardroom. Veronica struggled, her composure cracking. "Adrian, do something." Adrian looked stricken, his face pale. "Mom, I didn't know she'd." Christopher cut him off. "You knew enough, you sat there and planned with her. I thought she just wanted to push you out." Adrian shouted, his voice desperate. "I didn't think." "You didn't think at all," Darius said, stepping forward, his voice cold. Veronica thrashed against the officer's grip. "You think this is over. You think you've won. This company will eat you alive. You'll regret this." The officer pulled her toward the door, her voice growing shrill, breaking against the silence. The room exploded with noise, executives talking over one another, relatives muttering, lawyers scribbling notes. Christopher raised his cane and slammed it against the floor. "Enough." The room went silent. "I am not dead," he said firmly, "and I am not incapacitated. This company is mine to lead, and I will lead it." James Morrison nodded. "After what we've seen today, I doubt anyone here disagrees." A chorus of reluctant agreements followed. Christopher took a deep breath. "But things will change. This company was built on greed and profit at any cost. That ends today. From now on, Brown Global will focus on affordable housing, on building communities, on repairing the damage we've done." One executive raised a hand. "And if the shareholders resist, then they'll learn," Christopher said, his voice steady. Because stability doesn't come from squeezing people dry. It comes from making sure people can live, work and survive. And if that makes us less profitable, so be it. Christopher turned to Evelyn and Darius. His voice softened. I wouldn't be standing here if not for them. My mother, who I thought I lost forever, and my brother who risked his life to save mine. Darius blinked. The word brother hit harder than any boardroom declaration. For years he had been nobody's son, nobody's brother. Now, in front of the wealthiest and most powerful people he had ever seen, he was named as such. Evelyn gripped both their hands, her voice breaking. My sons, I am so proud. For a moment the boardroom didn't matter. The billions, the power plays, the lies, all of it faded against the sight of three people who had fought through betrayal and lost to find each other again. The weeks after Veronica's arrest moved like a blur. Satellite trucks idled outside the brown gates day and night. Reporters stood on the sidewalk with fixed smiles and bright lights, ready to pounce on any movement. When Christopher stepped out for therapy or a board debrief, microphones angled toward his face. When Evelyn opened the front door to get air, lenses clicked so fast the sound felt like rain. The headlines rolled across the country. Socialite stepmother charged in CEO murder plot. Power struggle inside Brown Global. Brother saves CEO in highway crash. For Darius it felt unreal. He had learned to pass through the world without notice, because attention rarely helped a black man who worked with his hands. Now strangers shouted his name like they knew him. Some wanted a photo, some wanted a soundbite about forgiveness. He kept his head down and chose his words carefully, because he didn't owe anyone a performance, and because Evelyn asked him to be patient. Let them see who you are, she said one morning while straightening his collar. You don't have to smile if you don't want to, just stand tall. Inside the mansion, quiet replaced pretense. The staff's steps softened, the polished floors felt colder. Richard moved slowly in his wheelchair with his nurse behind him, and guilt carved deeper lines into his face. Adrian rarely left his wing. When he did, his eyes didn't meet anyone else's. At night, Darius found Evelyn by the back window looking over the dark lawn. She held her hands clasped like she was keeping herself from shaking. You okay, Mom? He asked. She turned, trying a smile. I'm grateful you're here, and him. But this house, it holds too much of the worst of us. He looked out into the manicured yard and understood. The place was impressive and empty at the same time. A week later, Richard asked for a family meeting. They gathered in the smaller sitting room because the main parlor felt like a courtroom. Christopher leaned on his cane at the end of the sofa. Evelyn sat upright with her hands folded. Darius stood near the mantel, arms crossed because it kept his ribs from hurting. Richard cleared his throat. I owe you all an apology. His voice was rough, stripped of the old authority. I brought Veronica into our lives. I ignored what she was. I wanted someone to steady me after your mother left, and I let need blind me. I let her rule this house, and I convinced myself it was order. It was cowardice. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You didn't just look away, you chose her comfort over our safety. Richard's eyes dropped. I did. I can say I was weak. I can say I was lonely. Neither makes what I allowed any smaller. He looked at Christopher. I almost lost you. He looked at Darius, and I refused to see you. Darius stood still because anger pushed at his chest, and anger had never helped him. Seeing me now won't erase what happened, he said. I know, Richard replied. I don't expect forgiveness, but I would like a chance to be something better with the time I have left. Christopher watched his father for a moment that stretched longer than anyone wanted. Then he said, if you mean it, we don't do it in this house. Richard blinked. You want to move? We need to, Christopher said. This place is a stage for the person I thought I had to be. It's where the worst of us grew strong. I'm done breathing this air. Evelyn's eyes brightened. A place with a real kitchen. A table where we can hear each other chew. Doors that aren't 20 feet apart. Darius nodded once. If you're serious, I'll help you pack. The decision took weeks and shook the city anyway. Christopher announced he would sell his stake in Brown Global, retain a small advisory role for continuity, and donate the majority of his payout to affordable housing, scholarships for kids aging out of foster care, and a fund for memory care programs. Press calls stacked up. Is this a PR stunt? One demanded. Christopher kept his voice even. This is a course correction. I can't change where the money came from, but I can change where it goes. After the call, he sat on the terrace with Darius. The afternoon light fell across his cane, and the long scar at his hairline. You sure? Darius asked. You built your name on that company. Christopher let out a breath. I built a shell I lived inside. You and Mom gave me a door out. Darius looked at him, heat rising behind his eyes that he would not show. Then let's go. They looked at listings up and down the county, but most of the places felt staged. One had new granite, one had a view, one had a media room with chairs that looked like small spaceships. None of them felt like someplace a person healed. The farmhouse sat on 5 acres outside Maplewood at the end of a long gravel drive. White paint peeled in sheets from the siding. The porch wrapped around with boards that creaked. The front room smelled like old wood and sunlight. Evelyn stepped in first and put her palm flat against the door frame. This feels like home. Richard rolled through the kitchen, ran his fingers along the scratched counter, and smiled without meaning to. It's not fancy, that's why it's good, Christopher said. Darius walked the rooms in slow circles. He could see where the table would go. He could see Evelyn near the window reading cookbooks again. He could see a small desk by the hallway, where he could spread out his classwork. He realized he had not pictured a future in any room since he was a child. We'll take it, Christopher said. They moved with a truck and a borrowed trailer, because they wanted to do things themselves. Staff offered to pack, but Evelyn shook her head. We can carry our own lives. The farmhouse demanded work. The roof needed patches, the porch needed new beams. The stove ran hot on the left side, and cool on the right, and you had to learn it like a stubborn pet. Darius loved it. He replaced cabinet hinges. He rehung a door. He discovered a patience with imperfect things that he had not had to practice in a long time. Richard surprised everybody. He took over the yard like a general. He ordered raised beds for his wheelchair. He plotted tomatoes, basil, peppers, and a small patch of okra he claimed was essential. He started each morning in a sun hat that made him look like a tourist, and came in at noon with dirt on his cheeks and the grin of a person who had sweated for something real. You see this, he told Darius, holding up a seedling. You give it what it needs, it gives you dinner. Darius snorted. Seems like a good deal. It's the best deal, Richard said, and he wasn't talking about the plant. Evelyn joined the community center 2 days a week to teach a class called Good Meals, Tight Budget. She came home excited and told stories about a grandmother who stretched a rotisserie chicken into 3 dinners and a teenager who learned to love beans. Her memory still slipped some days, but the steady rhythm of care and being useful steadied her. They call me Miss Evelyn, she said, half embarrassed, wholly pleased. I like hearing it. Christopher took meetings at the kitchen table. He worked with non-profits that did not have glossy brochures but had waiting lists and battered vans. He learned the names of shelter managers and school counselors. When he made a decision to fund a project, he visited the site quietly instead of announcing it at a podium. One night he unrolled a set of blueprints on the table and tapped the paper. Maplewood Community Hub. Kitchen, classrooms, child care room, clinic corner. It opens next year. Evelyn leaned in. Are you naming a room after yourself? No, Christopher said, looking at Darius. His name on the sign out front. Darius frowned. Why would you do that? Because you taught me what community is, Christopher answered. You saved my life, and you showed me how to use it. Darius stared at the blue lines until they blurred. He nodded once because words would come out wrong if he tried them. A storm rolled in on a Thursday night. Rain hammered the porch roof, and wind bent the trees. Around midnight, Darius heard movement and found Evelyn in the hallway in her robe, hands shaking. Where am I? She asked, voice small. I don't know this place. I don't know where my boy is. Darius felt the familiar slice inside and forced himself to breathe. Mom, it's me. She peered at his face, panic tipping toward fear. He kept his voice calm. It's Darius. You're home. We're safe. Christopher came out of his room at the sound. He approached slowly and crouched to Evelyn's eye level. Hey Mom, we're right here. She blinked. Recognition returned in pieces. Her shoulders loosened. She let them guide her to the couch, and she held both their hands like she was afraid they might disappear. I hate this, she whispered. My head plays tricks. It steals names I need. We'll keep giving them back, Darius said. As many times as it takes, Christopher added. They sat with her until the storm quieted, and when she fell asleep they stayed. Darius watched the rise and fall of her breathing and knew the new enemy was not a person but time. He looked at his brother and saw the same understanding in his eyes. It bound them tighter than blood. A week later, Richard called Darius out to the beds after breakfast. The sun was pale, the soil damp. Richard lifted a small trowel and stuck it in the dirt like a flag. "You don't trust me," he said. It wasn't a question. Darius folded his arms. "I trust what I see." Richard nodded. "Fair. I treated love like a service someone owed me. Your mother gave everything." I responded with pride, and when she left I filled the hole with a person who knew how to feed my pride. He paused, and the old arrogance did not reappear. "I can't fix what I let happen, but I can be different with the time I have." "You can also say that, and not do it," Darius said. "I could," Richard answered, "so hold me to it." He pointed at the rows. "Help me with these tomatoes. I'll talk less and show you." They worked in silence, tying stems to stakes. Halfway down the row, Richard said, "You saved my son, and you kept my wife alive when I failed her. I'm not asking for your approval, I'm asking for your company. Let me earn the rest." Darius tied a knot, clipped the end and looked at the older man. "All right," he said, "show me." The town reacted in its own way. At the market people stopped Evelyn to ask about recipes. At the hardware store, a clerk told Christopher he'd heard about the community hub and offered a discount on paint. At the feed store, two old farmers told Darius they were proud of him and slipped him a sack of seed as if it were a medal. Not everyone liked them. One man muttered about billionaire guilt and another made a crack about Christopher's cane. But most folks judged them by what they did next. On a warm Saturday, the family attended a small gathering at the community center to break ground for the hub. There were no TV crews because nobody had called them. A pastor said a short prayer. A school nurse thanked them for including a clinic room. A child tugged Evelyn's sleeve and asked if she would teach macaroni and greens. Evelyn laughed and said yes. Darius watched Christopher stand quietly at the edge and realized he preferred this. No stage, no spotlight, just people who would use the thing they built. It felt like accountability and relief at the same time. They made Sundays a rule: no work calls, no errands, no guests unless you were willing to chop onions. Evelyn planned menus all week. Sometimes it was fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Sometimes it was beans, cornbread and greens from the yard. Sometimes it was spaghetti, because Christopher insisted on trying again with the garlic bread, and sometimes he almost got it right. One Sunday, as afternoon light stretched across the table, Evelyn set down a peach cobbler that made everybody close their eyes for a second. "This," she said, looking at all three of them, "is what I dreamed of when I didn't have anything. A table, the people I love, and time to sit." Richard raised his glass of sweet tea. "To second chances," Darius lifted his. "To ordinary days," Christopher smiled. "To love the kind you can't buy, the kind you prove." They ate and nobody hurried. When the dishes were done, Darius fixed the shelf in the hallway that had been crooked since move-in because he was tired of hearing Richard brag about his eye for level. Evelyn clapped. Richard pretended to be unimpressed, then asked Darius to help hang a frame with the first tomato they had picked, pressed and dried inside. Christopher leaned on his cane, grinning, because a family arguing about picture height was better than any perfect quiet. Near the end of summer, Evelyn missed her class at the community center for the first time. She had written the day wrong on the calendar and panicked when she realized it. She cried at the kitchen table because she didn't want to be unreliable. Christopher squeezed her shoulder. "They'll be there next week, and we'll make sure the calendar is bigger." Darius brought the wall calendar from the hallway and hung it lower. Big letters, color codes. "You teach me how you want it, and I'll keep it updated." Evelyn wiped her cheeks. "I hate needing help." Darius held her gaze. "We all need it. I needed it for most of my life. You gave it to me without asking for anything back." She reached for his hand. "Then I'll try to accept it without guilt." Later Christopher found Darius on the porch and leaned on the rail beside him. "I keep thinking I can control this," Christopher said. "That I can schedule it, or fund it away." Darius shook his head. "We can't stop the river, we can stand together in it." Christopher let out a breath. "Then that's the plan." The first cool night of fall, they carried lemonade to the porch. The mountains were dark blue against the last light. Crickets started up near the garden. A train sounded far off like a low memory. Christopher sank into one rocker. Darius took the other. The boards under them creaked, and it sounded like a house answering. "I used to measure success by numbers," Christopher said.
Profit, square footage, market share. Now I measure it by things like this. If I have this, the numbers don't matter. And if you don't have this, Darius said, no number helps. Christopher glanced over. Thank you for pulling me out of myself. Thank you for showing up when it mattered, Darius replied. Evelyn came out with a blanket and tucked it over both their knees because the air had turned sharp. She sat between them and took their hands. You boys don't know how lucky I feel, she said quietly. Not because of a house or money, because we chose each other when it would have been easier to let go. From inside, Richard called through the screen door, who wants cobbler seconds? Evelyn laughed. Bring the pan, Richard. We're not walking anywhere. Richard rolled out with the dish and 3 forks. He looked at his sons, then at Evelyn, and his eyes shone in the porch light. I don't deserve this, he said, but I will not waste it. Good, Evelyn said. Then sit. They ate warm cobbler from the pan, and passed the lemonade back and forth. After a while they fell into a quiet that didn't need filling. It felt like the kind of silence you trust. They had been many versions of themselves, lost, proud, angry, careful, alone. They had watched a house built on power nearly crush them, and had walked away from it together. They had learned that justice could be loud, but healing was daily and plain, and when the world asked for a headline, they chose a table instead. Some nights Evelyn forgot a name for a minute, and Darius said it softly, and Christopher wrote it on the board for tomorrow. Some days, Richard snapped at the garden for not listening, and Darius teased him until he laughed. On most Sundays the bread still burned a little, and nobody cared. They could not control the past, and could not promise the future. But they could keep showing up with small stubborn acts, a hand on a shoulder, a shelf leveled, a seed watered, a name spoken again. That was the home they built, and it held.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.